This is an article that came out March 8th, 2018. As you know, with the opioid plague going on in the country, one of the things that most of these states are struggling with is funding. Remember, Trump declared this a public health emergency and said there would be no new funding behind it. And as you can see, in Pennsylvania, they had to declare a state of an emergency, I believe back in December. And now we have the Maryland governor that made a trip to Washington, D.C. to plead for money. All right, things are bad in many of these states, and Trump, the money that he is pledging to give is just so low, it's no way it's going to help all 50 states. So he is in Maryland testifying before Congress, asking them to please step up on the funding because things are not going so well in the state of Maryland. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan told a Senate committee Thursday that the federal government needs to increase funding and tighten international shipping requirements to help stem the opioid plague sweeping the nation. Testifying before Congress for the first time, the Republican governor made an impassioned plea for additional funding, arguing in written testimony that the money included in a sweeping federal health bill approved in 2016 was clearly not enough to address the problem. Speaking to a broader issue over prescription of opiates, Hogan revealed that during his recovery from cancer, three different doctors offered to write him a 30-day prescription for opioid painkillers within a few weeks. I urge you and your colleagues to make increased funding for the opioid crisis a top priority, Larry Hogan told members of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. During a nearly 2 hour hearing, we simply cannot stop it without the federal government stepping in. The call for additional spending represents a break from some fellow Republicans who have noted that Congress approved legislation in 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act, that set aside about 1 billion in new treatment money for states. When Trump declared the opioid plague a national health emergency last fall, the White House did not recommend more funding, and that's been the major problem in the country. You know, without the funding, then there's no way you can get control over what's going on. They're not even going to get control over it with the money. You got 20 years of proof showing you that. The state received 20 million in new money under the federal law. Hogan, who was joined at the hearing by Oregon's Governor Kate Brown, a Democrat, also called on Congress to pass a bipartisan bill to require more sophisticated custom data on international shipments handled by the U.S. Postal Service. Requiring advanced custom data, supporters say, would help authorities identify packages containing drugs, including synthetic compounds like fentanyl. The majority of this deadly fentanyl is being shipped from China or is being smuggled across the border from Mexico, Hogan said. Maryland has been hard hit by the opioid plague and was wrestling with heroin overdoses in Baltimore years before prescription painkiller abuse became a problem in rural and suburban regions. There were 1,501 opioid-related deaths in Maryland from January to September last year, including 1,173 deaths tied to fentanyl, according to the Maryland Department of Health. Fentanyl also was present in two-thirds of fatal cocaine overdoses. Throughout his testimony, Hogan described the problem as the heroin and opioid crisis, underscoring that the issue is broader than heroin or prescription opioids alone. Many people who become addicted to painkillers switch to heroin, which can be cheaper and easier to find. We need to think about it as a process that needs to be tailored to a person's unique circumstances and environment, Brown said. We need to let people know that it's okay to come out of the shadows, that it's okay to ask for help. The hearing, um, so the governors pretty much went there to plead their case on how serious the drug problem is in their state and for Congress to consider extending more money to their state. So that's really was the goal of their visit. Okay, Senator Bill Cassidy, a Louisiana Republican, pressed both governors on whether their prescription drug monitoring program shared information with law enforcement. Though Maryland's program may share that information, some state lawmakers want to require the program to analyze the database for potential violations by doctors and pharmacies. I think we've got to be careful about sharing of information, Hogan said. We want to protect the folks that actually have drug addictions and not treat them just as law enforcement cases. Isn't that amazing? No one wants to criminalize the junkies of today like they did during the crack epidemic. I just find that really amazing, but we know for the obvious reason. Okay, though Hogan did not get a chance to respond to the question, Maryland officials said a law passed by the General Assembly in 2016 requires the Maryland Department of Health to credential residential treatment centers. The state also monitors the center's performance and investigates allegations of fraud and abuse. Hogan declared a state of emergency over the opioid plague about a year ago, and he pledged to spend $50 million over 5 years on the issue. His administration created an opioid operational command center that coordinates the state's response with local jurisdiction. As the crisis evolves and grows, so must our response to it, Hogan said. This plague is more than just a health crisis. It is tearing apart families and communities from one end of the nation to the other. Well, we know that. Okay. It's amazing how, I'm going to say this again. They are not saying a thing that the black community didn't say during the crack epidemic. The difference is they get to go to in front of the Senate, in front of the Congress, and beg for money, where crack epidemic, nobody got an opportunity to do that. Because, see, the only thing they were focused on were passing bills to make sure those addicts in the black community were mass incarcerated. And that's exactly what happened. There were no bills saying that it was a public health issue. There were no body sitting in those political bodies that gave a shit about the people. They could care less. They didn't care what your destruction was. They didn't care if they took you from your family. It was no concern whatsoever. But now they're so concerned about ruining lives. And oh my God, it's not a crime. It's a public health issue. Violence because of opioids is a public health issue. Everything's a public health issue now. It's amazing. Nothing's a crime, y'all. Everything's a public health issue. Violence is a public health issue. Any crime attached to opioids is a public health issue now. It's just amazing. The hypocrisy is never ending. But please tell me what you think about this governor going to Washington to plead for more funding, because the Trump administration hasn't gotten off their ass yet. over this opioid plague, other than putting together some phony committee that has done absolutely nothing. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell twice and join me on Black Junction TV and blackspot.com. Peace, family.